When did the first UFO appear in the skies over our world? Could it be that alien beings are the wellspring of our evolution? Are there scientific findings that alien life is interacting with life on Earth? Astounding connections between alien beings and the history of humankind in this chapter of UFO Diaries.
The mystery of the UFOs continues to be one of the most puzzling riddles facing our world today. What are these things that so many witnesses have seen streaking through the sky? Are they piloted by beings from another planet? And perhaps most importantly, why would extraterrestrial travelers come here? Is there something special about the Earth or the human race that draws these beings to our world? And if so, what is it? Many UFO researchers now believe that the answer to these questions may lie in our own history. One theory, for example, is that alien beings may have suddenly developed a profound interest in us on the day we exploded our first atomic bomb.
Did visitors from another world fear that we had then become a threat to other life in the universe? That with our primitive rockets we might launch devastating weapons at other inhabited worlds?
There may be convincing evidence to support this theory. It was, after all, shortly after the development of atomic power in 1945 that the first official flying saucer report was filed.
In 1947, private pilot Kenneth Arnold was flying in the mountains above Mount Rainier, Washington. When he landed, he claimed that there were 9 silvery discs that he saw following him up there that were going, and he estimated, 1,700 miles an hour. He described the movement of these craft as being like a saucer skipping across water. The reporters were very excited about this, and one of them coined the term flying saucer, and that took off.
But were the 9 objects Kenneth Arnold saw really the first UFOs?
During World War II, there were the Foo Fighters, luminous objects which would follow bombers on their way to bombing targets in Germany.
Or do objects seen in our skies earlier in history suggest the real mission of the alien visitors?
Well, in 1896 in California, people began to see what they thought was the solution. A phantom airship appeared over Sacramento in November of that year. They saw this big searchlight and an object behind it that presumably had propellers or wings or something of the sort. It moved into the rest of the country, particularly in April of 1897, and you would get any number of descriptions. One illustration from Minnesota shows something that looks like an aerial country ham with lights. Then there's another one from Texas that looks like a swallow-tailed football with bat wings. But there were several thousand reports made during 1896 and 1897 from all over the country of this strange object. And the newspapers over the next 2 months gave all sorts of illustrations of what this supposed secret invention looked like.
Is it possible that the phantom airships were in fact the same kind of UFOs seen by witnesses today? If so, we may find we must look even further back in history to find the first UFOs.
Okay, over here, I have some drawings that they're over 400 years old.
Recent discovery of documents over 400 years old have many skeptics re-examining their position on these ancient witnesses of UFOs.
In the 16th century, flying saucers?
Whoever did these drawings apparently saw something.
There were sightings in the 16th century as well, And these were usually ascribed to religious portents, signs from God. In August of 1566, in Basel, Switzerland, these large black globes floated in the sky. And in April 1561, these objects appeared over Nuremberg.
When we enter into the 16th and 17th centuries, we enter into a golden age of UFO-type sightings. John Calvin said that a miracle happened every day. In one case from 1600, you can see a depiction of what they thought burning beams in the sky looked like, probably much more artificial looking in the illustration than they really were to observe, but they were the kind of thing that people became quite excited about in those days.
Will we ever find the very first UFO sighting? How far back into human history can we search without learning of strange objects seen in the skies?
People have seen some kind of strange objects in the sky for as long as we have any human records. We can look back to Roman historians like Livy, who would report that an object like a flying shield came passing through the sky.
Is this a description 2,000 years old of the same UFOs seen in our century?
There are descriptions of UFOs in documents even older than the Romans.
Do you have anything even older?
If you wanted to...
Prior to the 16th century, most written records concerned religious problems. And here, the texts abound with rich descriptions of visitors from the skies.
It's called the Mahabharata.
The Hindu epic poem, the Mahabharata, tells of events that happened about 1200 B.C. One of the heroes of the poem is described as going up into heaven this way.
On a gigantic beam of light which shone like the sun, and whose noise was like the thunder of a thunderstorm.
A liftoff. Whoever wrote this witnessed some kind of a ship blasting off over 3,000 years ago.
Well, it's just a poem. You don't think that men from outer space would have left more than a few drawings or a few poems.
Did the author of that ancient text witness what we would call today a blast-off? Supposing for a moment that space travelers have visited Earth for thousands of years, would they not have left some proof of their existence, something besides stories and drawings of strange objects in the sky? Many UFO researchers believe that exactly this kind of evidence can be found on the plains of Nazca in southern Peru. These lines are probably 2,000 years old, but the resemblance to a modern airport is quite striking.
In some cases, the Nazca lines, for instance, they're described as being runways, but they're simply long, straight lines gouged in the desert. And there's no way any kind of an airplane could land on them and survive.
Are the markings on the plains of Nazca the remains of the busy airport they resemble? If so, they suggest a large volume of traffic, perhaps hundreds of space vessels coming and going.
If alien spacecraft then in use are like the ones they're using now, they would not have needed runways. Perhaps these are some kind of navigational markings, because they're visible only from the air.
If so, what were the interplanetary travelers bringing to Earth? Or what were they taking away? Could it be that they had a specific plan that included the inhabitants of Earth? The astounding answers when UFO Diaries return.
If travelers from a distant planet have been visiting our world for centuries, the possibility exists that they were not here as casual observers. Could the alien visitors have had some deep interest in human development? And if so, how much of our history was affected by beings not of this earth?
I believe that there is substantial evidence that we were visited in ancient times by beings who wanted to help us to advance and progress. In Istanbul, for example, there is a strange map which had been made by the 16th century Turkish cartographer Piri Reis.
And you say the Piri Reis map was made in 1513?
If it has been dated accurately, this map was made in 1513. only 21 years after Columbus reached the Americas.
Quite a complete map for that time.
They show that Antarctica is a continent, a fact we didn't learn until the 19th century.
I mean, look, this map shows mountains in Antarctica.
And this map even shows mountains there that were not discovered until the 20th century.
Did this early cartographer get his information from someone who had seen our world from outer space? And is it significant that Piri Reis's extraordinary map came into being just at the time European civilization was beginning a vast expansion?
Could alien beings somehow have taken an interest in the course of human progress? If so, their involvement may have been vast and far-reaching, including many scientific advances literally handed down from the heavens.
If you have doubts that some culture far in advance of ours has been helping us along, you should look at some of the cultures of Mexico and Central America. You'll see, for example, a pyramid in Yucatan called El Castillo, the castle. Twice a year, exactly on the spring and autumn solstice, the sun aligns across those steps in such a way as to cast an eerie shadow, the image of a giant snake crawling down the pyramid. The snake represents Kukulkan, the Mayan god who supposedly created all life on Earth. The local legend has it that Kukulkan himself ordered the pyramid at Chichen Itza built in this way.
But why would the serpent god command such a structure to be built? And why was it carefully constructed in such a way that the serpent image appears, as if by magic, twice a year?
The Mayan pyramid works as a calendar. It predicts exactly 365 and 1/4 days. For people who had no other calendar, this signal of planting and harvesting season meant life and death. I believe they had somebody to help them figure this all out.
If this remarkable structure were a gift from the gods, as their legend has it, then these super beings were indeed deeply concerned with the local culture. It would seem they wanted these people to thrive and survive.
We have to consider this. Around 600 AD, they abandoned their cities, crops, and everything and moved north. There was no war, plague, or famine. They simply moved as though someone had told them to move.
Was the Mayan nation deliberately raised in this controlled environment and then set out to share its advanced knowledge with the rest of the region? Isn't it more reasonable to believe that the Mayan people were simply more advanced than we've thought? That they achieved scientific wonders without any outside help?
But we have to take into account the stories told by so many of the native cultures of how their races were visited by beings who came down from the sky to visit and help them.
Is that it? That's it. Still here?
Take, for example, this carving in the Mexican temple at Palenque. It is supposedly related to that culture's stories of how it came to be, of how they survived all these years.
I'll have to admit, does look familiar.
The resemblance to a modern space traveler is very striking, but might this not also be mere coincidence? If so, then the mystery only grows deeper when we learn that many researchers believe this sculpture represents Kukulkan, who came down from the sky and gave mankind many technological advances, including the calendar. And yet many researchers remain unconvinced that these artifacts prove mankind has been frequently visited by extraterrestrials. Skeptics claim that this so-called evidence indicates a technology very much like ours in the 20th century, with smoke and flames, airport runways, pressure suits, and so on.
All of this looks like the kind of technology we use today.
Could beings from another world have made visits to Earth using rockets and planes similar to those we use today? If so, they would have to have come from somewhere nearby.
It seems improbable that beings light years away would drop in on us. But visitors from one of our neighboring worlds, that's something else.
But if that is true, which neighboring world? Could it be that there is another planet, one we have yet to learn about? We'll find out when UFO Diaries return.
For a time, imaginative people of all kinds believed that intelligent life might exist on some of Earth's nearest neighbors. In fact, many people still associate UFOs with Mars or Venus.
But now we know that conditions on the other planets in our system make it very unlikely that any kind of recognizable life could exist on these inhospitable worlds.
And so the notion of Earth being visited by creatures from nearby planets now seems utterly impossible. Or is it?
Zecharia Sitchin has dedicated years of study to the belief that this world's most ancient visitors came from a planet in our own system.
I believe that the answer to most of our questions about extraterrestrial visitors lies in the ancient records of the Sumerians. The Sumerian civilization emerged in what is now Iraq about 6,000 years ago. They provided the basis for every great culture that followed them, starting with the Babylonians and Assyrians and on, up to our own modern society. Every aspect of civilization that we consider essential had its first in Sumer. Writing and mathematics, the wheel, the kiln, brickmaking, high-rise buildings, kingship, codes of law, astronomy, and much, much more. Many cultures struggled for centuries to advance and to develop. But the Sumerian civilization appeared almost overnight as if planted there.
The Sumerians had detailed knowledge of the solar system thousands of years before modern astronomy. How could they have known?
Most amazing was the Sumerian knowledge of astronomy. They knew of all the planets we know of today, described them in texts, and even depicted them correctly by location and size. The astronomer Copernicus is often said to be the first to prove that the planets orbited around the sun, and that Earth was one of those planets. That was in 1543. But the Sumerians said the same thing 5,500 years earlier. Even more amazing, they described Uranus and Neptune as blue-green twins. Modern science was unable to closely observe these planets until 1986 with the flyby mission of the Voyager probe that found them to be blue-green twins exactly as the Sumerians had described them thousands of years earlier.
Was this a fortunate choice of words for an imaginative Sumerian writer? Or was it based on information from someone who had seen Uranus and Neptune at close range?
And does this mean we found the first UFO 6,000 years in the past?
The Sumerian texts, such as this one, explicitly state that all their advanced knowledge came from those whom they called Anunnaki, literally meaning those who from heaven to earth came.
But where did these visitors come from? Did the Sumerians leave any clues to the origin of the Anunnaki?
Ancient Sumerian writings describe a planet orbiting the sun on an oblique to the others, and of such a long orbit that it only makes one complete circuit every 3,600 of our years. They call this world Nibiru, and it was from that world that the Anunnaki came. If this theory is correct, it suggests how an inhabited planet, called Planet X by astronomers, could have once been close enough to Earth for the Anunnaki to reach us with some kind of short-range vehicles.
Does this explain how alien explorers might have come to Earth in spaceships not too different from those we have today?
And if there is a planet such as the Sumerian texts describe, has it not passed by Earth time and time again?
My study of history shows several time periods during which mankind's knowledge and progress seem to have suddenly leaped forward. And they do seem to be about 3,600 years apart. To me, this is highly suggestive that the Anunnaki have taken advantage of their proximity to Earth on several occasions and have helped us to advance and progress every time.
Has human progress been periodically boosted by the race that started our earliest civilization? Or are we part of a cosmic science experiment?
But why would an alien race be so willing, even eager, to help advance the course of human progress? Could it be that we are somehow part of them? The astounding answers when UFO Diaries returns.
We're exploring the theory that travelers have come to Earth throughout the ages, arriving from a hidden planet in our own solar system.
Are we any closer to an explanation of why these ancient visitors would be so eager to help mankind progress and develop?
It seems very likely that these space travelers, thousands of years ago, wished for our race to survive for the same reason we wish our children to survive. Maybe it was these beings who seeded this planet with their own life forms, and we may be, in a real sense, their children.
If that is true, we've found the first UFO, and it's the one that brought us here to this world we call our home. In fact, this theory may be supported by the biblical account of the creation of humankind.
The 6th chapter of Genesis tells us the Nephilim took the daughters of men as wives, and these human women bore children to them, and these were the mighty men who were of old. Could this refer to the alien visitors the Sumerians called the Anunnaki? Did men from another world mate with human females, producing hybrid offspring?
Yes, the evidence is very convincing. We may well be mixed breed descendants of humans and extraterrestrials. In fact, according to ancient records, the females whom the Nephilim married were offspring of Adam, himself created by an earlier genetic manipulation.
Wait a minute. Look at this.
It's DNA. Could it be that the ancient Sumerians actually knew something about genetics?
We have only recently discovered the key to our genetic structure, the twisting coils of DNA. But here is the same depiction on a Sumerian artifact from 5,000 years ago. It illustrates the process by which the Anunnaki jumped the gun on evolution and created Homo sapiens.
Is this the ultimate discovery in the study of UFOs? In finding the earliest alien visitors to Earth, have we also revealed that they are our ancestors?
Yes, we are partly of the same genetic makeup, created in their image and after their likeness.
Does this explain why ancient depictions of visitors from the sky often resemble human beings? Have we traced the first UFO and discovered ourselves?
The modern UFO belief system, in a way, has become part of modern American society's creation myth. You have these all-powerful beings who are responsible for everything we do not understand. In a way, they're equivalent to Zeus and Hercules in Greek and Roman mythology. So in a way, they are just the latest chapter in the great human mythological story.
Will these stories ever be confirmed as truth? Will the ancient astronauts return to check on our progress? We can only wait and see. And meanwhile, continue puzzling over these strange clues in the pages of the UFO Diaries.
Of Giza. Some scientists now believe it was already ancient before the first pharaoh was born. What have we learned about the huge granite spirit stones in the heart of the pyramid? Do they still perform some eerie function?
It appears that the Giza pyramids were built as beacons by extraterrestrials as part of a landing corridor ending
at the spaceport in the Sinai Desert.
Many now believe our own space program has found a connection between the Great Pyramid of Egypt and pyramids found on other planets.
We may discover that we, in fact, were the Martians.
Experts now believe that the Great Pyramid is finally giving up some of its secrets because, like the Egyptians, we have turned our attentions to the skies. Is there an alien connection? The amazing and controversial answers in this chapter of the UFO Diaries.
The pyramids of Egypt have been the objects of mystery and controversy for thousands of years. Scholars, ancient and modern, have argued over how they were built, why they were built, and who built them. The traditional view is that the pyramids were built by Egyptians of the 4th dynasty around 2500 BC as burial tombs for the pharaohs of that period. But is that view sustainable in light of what we know today? Many experts insist the ancient Egyptians could not have built these marvelous structures. And if they didn't, shouldn't we learn who built them and why? Archaeologists have told us for decades now that many of the Egyptians of 4,000 years ago worshipped the sun and believed in fantastic beings who came down from the sky to bring knowledge and wisdom to mankind. Is this a clue to the real origin of the pyramids? Do recent discoveries on other planets tell us more about the pyramids of Egypt? Is it possible that these structures were constructed by the same architects? Could the true nature of the pyramids hold the answer to the mysteries of mankind's existence on Earth? All of these questions are mere speculation without more evidence that the pyramids are anything more than what they appear to be. 3 gigantic piles of carved stones on the edge of the desert at Giza. The largest has been attributed to the pharaoh Cheops, but it is more widely known as simply the Great Pyramid. Many scientists agree that physically, mathematically, and scientifically, the Great Pyramid of Khufu could not have been built. And yet, there it is, 42 stories high, covering an area the size of 10 football fields, an almost solid mass of intricately fitted stone blocks, each weighing 2.5 to 10 tons. Enough stone to build 35 Empire State Buildings, with several tons left over. Its alignment to true north is almost perfect, and the precision of its construction has never been duplicated. But could the Egyptians of over 4,000 years ago have built such a magnificent structure? Or should we look for a more advanced civilization behind the pyramids? The Greek historian Herodotus established the traditional view when he visited Egypt in the 5th century BC and wrote that Egyptian crews of 100,000 men, replaced every 3 months, built the Great Pyramid in 20 years. But is that possible?
To build the Great Pyramid in 20 years, as some archaeologists claim, would have meant setting one of those huge stones every 3.5 minutes, 24 hours a day. That would require a technology we don't have today.
But getting the stones in place was only part of the problem. How did they manage to get these massive stones from the quarries to the building site?
There's a widespread general belief, which Hollywood has helped to promote, that hundreds of thousands of slaves were used to build the pyramids. Nothing could be further from the truth.
The Egyptians of the 4th dynasty were neither a formidable military nation nor a very aggressive one. But even if they were, there were not enough potential slaves within a 5,000-mile radius to have supplied the workforce needed.
But if there was not enough manpower available, how could the work have been done? Even if the builders used some kind of clever machinery to help them get the great blocks into place, Egyptologists still disagree on what kind of device that could have been.
The generally accepted academic viewpoints are divided equally between the rollers and the rampers. These two theories are being taught in the schools right now as facts, when they're not even substantial theories.
With the ramper school of Egyptology, we are asked to believe that a mile-long ramp was built, rising in slope as the pyramid increased in height. Actually, it would have required more effort to build the ramp than to build the pyramid itself. There would have been some 6 billion pounds of construction garbage to get rid of afterwards.
If the ramp theory is discredited, the remaining explanation is that the blocks were rolled on logs. But does that theory survive close scrutiny?
Moving a given stone in this manner can be demonstrated, but some rather obvious considerations should have dispelled this notion long ago. The only trees available in ancient Egypt were date palms, and as a food source, it's unlikely they would have been cut down. Importing logs would have required more shipping than Egypt has ever possessed in its entire history, just to transport the 25 million trees needed. Next, it's virtually impossible to roll a log on stone-chipped roads. But even if they could be rolled, the great weight of the stones would have crushed the logs to pulp within a very short distance.
The traditional explanations of the origin of the pyramids have been accepted for years. But should we carefully re-examine those long-held notions? The discrepancies between the theories and the facts seem to demand it. Amazingly, the sciences of geology, mathematics, and astronomy seem to reach their zenith with the construction of the Great Pyramid. Construction techniques were used that can't be duplicated today. How could this be? What did the builders of the Great Pyramid know that we don't? More to the point, where did they learn it? And what new scientific evidence is there that suggests an alien connection? The astonishing answers when we return. However the Great Pyramid was built, one thing seems certain. Tremendous power of some sort had to be employed. Since the ancient Egyptians, so far as we know, were dependent solely on muscle power, and that seems insufficient to the purpose, what was the force that put all those gigantic stone blocks so carefully into place?
And keep our minds open to perhaps at some point learning that this is a very real possibility, that other civilizations, other beings, maybe perhaps from other planets, solar systems, or galaxies, assisted the Egyptians in the construction of the pyramids.
Supposing that some traveling race from another world did in fact build the pyramids, did they leave any clues as to the purpose of these structures? Some experts say the answer lies in the foundation and orientation of the Great Pyramid.
It's doubtful that ancient Egyptians had any knowledge of modern geology, and without this science, it's inconceivable that a structure this size could be built which would not crumble from lack of a proper foundation. Normally, it would just sink slowly into the ground. In modern construction, engineers find a settling rate of 6 inches in 100 years acceptable for office buildings. In 5,000 years, the Great Pyramid, weighing 14 billion pounds, has settled less than 1/2 inch.
This engineering marvel does suggest that whoever built the pyramids not only intended for the structures to remain as they were for millennia, but knew how to achieve that goal. And as engineers now tell us, they also knew how to keep the 4 sides of that giant edifice in almost perfect alignment.
In modern construction, if the builders could maintain each side of the 756-foot wall within 6 inches of being perfectly straight, then it would be a tremendous accomplishment. But the Great Pyramid is only off of straight alignment by approximately 1/4 of an inch. That's totally impossible to duplicate in today's modern construction field.
The Great Pyramid is evidence of a phenomenal knowledge of the science of astronomy. They could measure the day, the year, and the precession of the equinoxes. They knew that the Earth was a sphere, and they knew how to compute latitude and longitude accurately.
The geographical orientation of the Great Pyramid of Giza is perhaps its single most amazing characteristic. Its sides run almost exactly from north to south and east to west. The deviation is within 3 arc minutes from true north. How could an ancient quasi-Stone Age culture have been able to determine true north?
And while Europeans would argue for centuries about whether or not the Earth was flat, the ancient Egyptians, or someone thousands of years earlier, had calculated the longitude and latitude of the Earth as a sphere. Could it have been the 4th Dynasty Egyptians?
There have been two recent hard scientific discoveries about the pyramid in Egypt, which are not consistent with the Egyptologists' presumption that it was a tomb built by a king. Those two things are the radioactive dating, radiocarbon dating of the mortar from the top to bottom, which indicates that the top is 1,000 years older than the bottom. Well, the other discovery was the radioactive sand found in 1987 in a set of chambers just behind the Queen's Chamber in the center of the pyramid. We have placed these two discoveries together to come up with a very consistent explanation for both. The strange curve, top to bottom, looks like an exposure curve. If you have a radioactive source in the center of the pyramid, the radioactive sand is exactly where we had calculated such a radioactive source to irradiate the pyramid might be found.
Could it be that the Great Pyramid was constructed with what was simply routine technology to a race of beings capable of something like atomic power and interstellar travel?
But as the evidence for an extraterrestrial origin of the pyramids begins to mount, we encounter what appears to be a warning not to explore the matter too deeply.
Because some scientists claim they have encountered a powerful negative force inside the Great Pyramid, a force they called the Curse of the Pharaohs.
The Curse of the Pharaohs story begins in the 1920s when two Englishmen, Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon, discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. Among the spectacular riches, Carter and Carnarvon uncovered a tablet on which a dire curse had been written. Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the peace of Pharaoh. The warning did not make them nervous, but they were afraid their native assistants might panic and quit. They crossed out any mention of the tablet's discovery from their records and tossed it into the rubble. The whole incident might have been forgotten forever had not some 36 scholars and others connected with the excavation died sudden and mysterious deaths. Carnarvon and Carter were about to uncover the mummy itself when Lord Carnarvon became deathly ill. Although suspecting an infection, doctors were uncertain of a diagnosis. He died before his son reached his bedside, and precisely at the moment of his death, an unexplainable power blackout occurred all over Cairo. Another victim was American architect Arthur Mace, who had been the person to rip out the last piece of wall blocking the entrance to the tomb. He died in the same hotel with the same symptoms as Carnarvon, feverish and in a sudden coma. The morning after Carter had shown his friend George Gould the tomb, Gould awoke with a high fever. By nightfall, he was dead. Radiologist Archibald Douglas Reed was the first to cut the mummy's wrapping and x-ray it. Reed died aboard ship on his way home to England.
According to historians of the Curse of the Pharaohs, an eminent physician and biologist in Cairo, Dr. Ezzedine Taha, claimed discovery of an ancient microscopic fungus that had probably survived in a dormant state for thousands of years, which could be controlled by modern antibiotics. Ironically, before he could prove his theory, Dr. Taha died in a freak automobile accident.
Assuming that the pyramids were built by some race far more advanced than the ancient Egyptians, did they leave behind this strange fungus as a sort of burglar alarm? A measure to keep humans from tampering with the pyramid?
What deadly secret lies in the forbidden heart of the Great Pyramid? Some believe the great granite slabs above the king's chamber, called spirit stones by the Egyptians, once served some fantastic function. Are they still functioning? Could they be the key to the real purpose of the pyramid? Some amazing answers when UFO Diaries returns.
We know that whoever constructed the Great Pyramid at Giza built it so that it would last a long, long time. Archaeologists tell us that the structure was originally covered with a protective stone coating, making the sides perfectly flat and smooth. That outer surface was broken apart and used as building materials during the construction of the city of Cairo, but the pyramids themselves still remain unharmed.
And we've already heard how the pyramid is unique among all buildings on Earth in its refusal to settle into the ground, as other giant monuments inevitably must. And we've heard of the Curse of the Pharaohs, where something seemed to have been at work in killing all who explored too deep.
Apparently, whoever built the pyramid wanted it to be left exactly as it was. But why? What was its purpose? And was its preservation important because they planned to use it again someday? In the early 1950s, translation was begun on a vast library of cuneiform tablets that had been discovered many years earlier in the ruins of the Library of Nineveh, the oldest written record known to science. One passage of the text seems to describe the pyramids of Egypt. Sumerian texts are believed to be over 10,000 years old, 6,000 years older than the Egyptians who were supposed to have built the pyramids. But if the Sumerian translation is accurate, the pyramids were already there before the first pharaoh was born. If all of this is true, then these ancient tablets may hold the answer to the true purpose of the pyramids. Dr. Zechariah Sitchin has spent years studying the mysteries of these Sumerian writings.
Based on evidence provided by Sumerian texts, it appears that the Giza pyramids were built as beacons by extraterrestrials as part of a landing corridor ending at a spaceport in the Sinai Desert.
An intriguing and exotic theory. But how could the pyramids be of use to travelers from another world? After all, as large as they are, they're not visible from outer space.
Some people suggested there's a vortex of energy coming out of the great apex of the pyramid, and that it actually expands in diameter as you go higher above the pyramid.
But for this theory to be credible, the pyramids would have to radiate energy, which an ordinary pile of stones simply does not do. But are the pyramids different in this way?
The pyramids are essentially crystalline in structure, and therefore highly receptive to radio-like energy waves or even cosmic microwaves. The Great Pyramid at Giza, with its 5 granite slabs above the king's chamber, are what the ancient Egyptians called spirit stone, and they could have been a massive receiver-transmitter tuned to some distant part of the universe of which we are still ignorant.
There's a vortex of energy emanating from the apex of the pyramid, which actually expands in diameter as it rises higher and higher into the heavens. A simple example of this emanating apex energy was first demonstrated by British inventor Sir W. Siemens. When he drank from the wine bottle he brought along, he experienced a slight shock as the bottle touched his lips. The electrical activity intrigued him so much that he took a wet newspaper, wrapped it around the bottle, converting it into a crude electrical accumulator, which most high school science students would recognize as a Leyden jar. Although we don't know why or how, the Great Pyramid seems to be an accumulator of energies.
The only person of record, of authority, who still stands behind the assertion that there was radioactive sand was Dr. Ibram Nawawi, who gave in 1987 a discussion at an archaeological conference in Tennessee where a friend of mine, another archaeologist, literally heard him say with his own lips that they had found highly radioactive sand in the Great Pyramid. This does not compute as a low-tech structure, but something much, much more intriguing.
So might not the pyramids have been exactly what the ancient Sumerian texts seem to claim? A sort of cosmic lighthouse for passing space travelers? As incredible as this may sound, it does seem to be the first explanation of the Great Pyramids that truly covers all the facts of its amazing construction, placement, and design. But is there any other evidence that the builders of these remarkable edifices were from outer space? These same Sumerian texts also refer to the Earth as the 7th planet, as if being counted from the outside of our solar system in toward the sun. Since Neptune and Pluto were only discovered in this century, how could the Sumerians of 10,000 years ago have known that the Earth is indeed the 7th planet? According to Dr. Sitchin, no one but space travelers coming to Earth past Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars could have considered Earth the 7th planet. Has modern science discovered any other reason to believe that the Great Pyramids were not the product of humans? Our space program may have discovered the most amazing connection of all, pyramids on Mars that correspond precisely to the pyramids of Egypt. That astounding discovery when UFO Diaries returns. Our quest for the truth about the Great Pyramid at Giza has now taken us into outer space, and to the theory that beings from another world may have actually built this colossal monument for their own purposes. And now we begin to make our own voyages to other planets, exploring the vast reaches of our own solar system. But have our meager explorations to date helped us to find the answer to the pyramid mystery, or simply raised more questions?
The fundamental mathematical relationships communicated by the structures at Cydonia are now eerily replicated in the Giza complex here on Earth, including the very placement of the Sphinx. Even the key latitude of Giza, north of the equator, is now directly linked to the D&M pyramid latitude at Cydonia on Mars, so we can't tell who the builders were. There is a clue, however, and it's in this mile-long, 1,500-foot-high humanoid face. Our thinking now, our team's thinking, is that that face is our face, or what we once were. So in a sense, someday, not now, but someday, we may discover that we, in fact, were the Martians.
Are the so-called pyramids of Mars merely bizarre natural formations? Or are they the ruins of carefully constructed monuments that have been abandoned for many thousands of years? It does stand to reason that voyagers traveling across our entire solar system might place such markers or beacons on more than one world.
Even so, the notion of extraterrestrial visitors constructing the pyramids of Egypt may seem to many to be simply too outrageous. Is it not possible, after all, that the ancient Egyptians were simply far more advanced than we previously believed?
Don't the theories of alien pyramid builders ignore the ancient Egyptians and any contribution they might have made in the creation of the Great Pyramid? Certainly. But then, the Egyptians themselves seem to have ignored it also.
The Great Pyramid was the greatest single undertaking in the whole history of mankind. And yet there's not one picture or drawing, not one artifact, not one inventory or tally sheet to tell of its construction. The Egyptians left us some 3,000 years of written and pictorial history, covering virtually everything that happened in their culture, from babies being born to plowing and harvesting, building, weaving, sacrificing, praying, embalming, but nothing about the pyramids of Giza. Why?
When you enter the Great Pyramid, it's devoid of these hieroglyphs. And the answer is simple and explained by the fact that the Great Pyramid was not built by Egyptians. The Great Pyramid was built by a group of people which are known as Hyksos, or shepherd kings, rulers of foreign countries that came into Egypt and constructed the Great Pyramid with better methodology.
In light of all the new findings, experts seem to be reaching the same conclusion. Could it be that the proof of extraterrestrial visitation to Earth has, for centuries, been right there before our very eyes?
Do Egyptian records fail to mention the construction of the pyramids because they were already there when the Nile Valley culture began to flourish? Is this the final proof that the pyramids are the keepers of a mystery that we may never solve?
Until that time, the pyramids continue to stand silent and mysterious, refusing to allow their secrets to become a completed chapter of the UFO Diaries. Why did so many American and Soviet attempts to reach Mars fail? What was the strange elliptical object photographed by a Russian probe just before it disappeared? Is someone or something working to prevent us from learning the whole truth about this amazing image on the Martian surface? Would the billion-dollar Mars Observer have been able to give us the answers if it too hadn't disappeared? Discover the Earth-Mars connection in this chapter of UFO Diaries.
planet Mars is next to our own, the fourth world counting out from the sun, barren, perpetually cold, and with a thin atmosphere of poisonous gas. Surely no intelligent life could survive there. The surface of Mars, we now know, is covered with meteor craters, gigantic mountains, and deserts that reach around the entire planet.
And one thing more, a giant sculpture that many scientists now speculate was created by some unknown race of intelligent beings. And if it is what it appears to be, what does that have to do with Earth? Mars is our nearest and most reachable galactic neighbor, but for some as yet unexplained reason, trying to study this planet has met with failure after failure. Beginning with 2 attempts by the Soviets in 1960, both missions mysteriously failed.
After the problems the Russians had getting their probes to Mars, American scientists started to joke among themselves about some great galactic ghoul that was preventing our missions from getting there too. In November 1964, the Americans launched the Mariner missions to Mars. But as it approached Mars, Mariner 3's camera shroud failed to open, making the camera useless.
It does indeed seem that missions to Mars have met with an unusually high failure rate. But in July of 1965, the American probe Mariner 4 finally brought success and completed the first flyby of Mars. So had Earth scientists at last outwitted the galactic ghoul?
Apparently not. When the Soviets then attempted to actually land a probe on Mars, something astonishing happened.
Everything on the Mars probe seemed to be working perfectly, and then it just shut off.
Could it be that there's something out there that's interfering with Earth's efforts to conquer space? Or is it all just an incredible string of coincidences? Whatever the reason, it was 5 years before the United States made another attempt to reach Mars. But in 1976, the Viking probe began sending volumes of images back to Earth from their orbits above Mars, including these.
Encouraged by the success of the Viking probe, the Soviet Union, with international cooperation, launched a set of satellites in 1988. Phobos 1 never even made it to the planet. At some point it just disappeared.
Phobos 2, the probe that was sent up to look at one of the moons of Mars, apparently encountered something very strange, of which the Soviets had a picture that did surface in the United States.
Of a very massive elliptical shape object.
The NASA individuals here that may know about it, of course, would never make a comment on it.
And then it too disappeared.
And 5 years later, the American space probe Mars Orbiter seems to have met the same fate. But what exactly did happen to them?
Many researchers now believe the loss of so many Mars probes cannot be an accident, but a deliberate attack on spacecraft from Earth by something or someone near Mars that does not wish to be photographed.
Could this be true? Has this bizarre string of space disasters occurred because we caught a glimpse of something we were not supposed to see?
Has the Viking space probe presented us with a mystery that is unsolvable?
The mystery first began to unfold in 1976, when the unmanned Viking space probe was going about its highly successful mapping mission of our neighbor planet. When the images that were transmitted back to Earth began to be analyzed, this surface feature in the region designated as Cydonia caught the attention of people all over the Earth.
The initial official reaction from NASA about this photograph is that it was just a trick of chance sunlighting. Certainly no one believed that there was a huge carved face on the surface of Mars. Besides, who could have made such a thing? No one believes in the science fiction version of men on Mars. And we know that Mars is not capable of supporting intelligent life as we know it. So the idea of this being a creation of intelligence was not even considered by NASA. Despite all of this, when the image was first recorded, it was labeled head.
But fortunately, the story doesn't end there. The picture caught the eye of image analysis experts Vince DiPietro and Greg Molinar. DiPietro and Molinar undertook the colossal task of discovering what the strange picture really showed.
At first, they just enlarged the photo and considered there was nothing there at all. So Vincent DiPietro and I designed a computer program to enhance the image in much more detail than NASA had done.
And even though their new process resulted in images as convincing as these, NASA apparently continued to insist that the image was nothing more than a trick of the light. And to prove it, they said that Viking had photographed the same area from a different angle, and that there was no face visible in the second photograph.
Then we went through the archives to see if there was any other satellite passes over that same area. NASA said there wasn't at first, and we looked through their archives and found one. And there, just as before, there was a face with a higher sun angle, showing more detail than before. And images of the eyes showed pupils, and of the mouth area showed teeth. We were very impressed.
Now there were two photographs of the head. Was this proof the image was built by intelligent beings? Did this second photograph solve the mystery, or was it only the beginning of an even greater puzzle? A puzzle with one of the most important pieces found on Earth. A startling answer. UFO Diaries returns. These two separate frames, identified by their NASA frame numbers 35A72 and 70A13, also contain considerable detail about the surrounding area, revealing several other images that DiPietro and Molinar found as exciting as the mysterious face.
About 10 miles away from the face is a couple of pyramids, and the strange thing about those pyramids is they're very regular triangular shape. And in the corner of each corner there appears to be a buttress, and on close examination the buttress itself is pyramid shaped.
Was this undeniable proof that an intelligent race had once lived on the planet Mars?
This would be really, really remarkable for this to be a natural formation.
Since the time of that discovery, science writer and consultant Richard Hoagland has worked tirelessly to discover the whole truth about the mysterious Cydonia region of Mars.
A member of our team, Dr. Mark Carlotto, decided to use a state-of-the-art 3D computer modeling technique which now strongly indicates that the face could in fact be a real three-dimensional human-looking sculpture, a sculpture 1,500 feet high and over a mile long.
But is it not still possible that these intriguing shapes are really nothing more than accidents of nature? That the researchers who study them are simply letting their imaginations run wild?
Many intriguing questions are raised by the apparent connections between this image from the planet Mars and ancient structures here on Earth. Perhaps the most intriguing being, does this image on the surface of another planet give us important clues to the origins of ancient structures on our world?
Richard Hoagland's study team may have uncovered proof that one of our oldest relics was not built by human hands.
And as I began looking at some references and books and talking with colleagues, this was a sketch done by Shannon, one of our early artists in the team, we both realized that this image was somehow trying to tell us something profound. It was trying to say this.
Could the resemblance between the face at Cydonia and the Sphinx at Giza be more than a mere coincidence?
And if not, does all this prove once and for all that these great monuments were all designed and built by an intelligent race from another world?
Did the Egyptians, in fact, as we know them, do this remarkable structure?
Recent archaeological and geological discoveries demonstrate that the Sphinx is at least 10,000 years old and maybe even older.
That is, the Sphinx appears to be much, much more heavily weathered than we have any right to expect from only, quote, 5,000 years of desert weathering. The kind of weathering we see on the Sphinx is best explained by the action of running water. You need rain to get that degree of erosion, 12 feet of it in some places. And that amount of rain has not fallen in Egypt for at least 10, maybe 15 or 20,000 years. Now that raises a wonderful problem. It means that we're now looking at a monumental work of art created at a time when nobody else on planet Earth is supposedly able to do anything of that magnitude or scale. There's no other contemporary civilization to pin it on. So who did it?
Could these both be ancient sculptures made by the same race of beings? If so, who or what is this face intended to represent? The key to understanding the face on Mars may lie in the fact that the Sphinx of Egypt is a combination of hominid and feline, half man, half lion.
It was at this point that we began to worry less about the ultimate reality of the so-called face on Mars and more about the meaning of the message of Sidonia.
An astonishing discovery when UFO Diaries returns. Hoagland's researchers, in comparing the two images, made an amazing discovery.
Maybe there's a connection. Maybe the face of Sidonia is half man, half something else.
First, they copied the left half of the Sidonia head, made a mirror image of it, and pasted it onto the other side.
That's the Sidonia half.
The results were interesting, but inconclusive.
Wouldn't it be wild?
However, when they tried the same thing with the right half, flipped it over and matched it up on the left side, the result was a clear image of a lion's head.
Are these merely strange optical illusions, or are they the key to understanding the real truth behind our own past? Surely it's still possible that mere coincidence could be the culprit behind all of these so-called connections between monuments of Earth and the images we've seen from Mars. Or is there any more and better evidence?
In southwest England, the ancient man-made mountain of Silbury Hill has loomed over the horizon since time immemorial. Nearby is Avebury, believed to be a fortress centuries old, tall earthen walls protecting an inner mound. The area also contains an amazing connection to the structures at Sidonia. The connection here was determined not by simple observation and supposition, but was founded in the solid facts of geometry. The question was, what if the ancient ruins in England corresponded in size, shape, and dimension to the features on the plain of Sidonia?
What if the Avebury circle was to represent the crater and Silbury was to represent the tholus, and the angles and positions of ancient features, including where the cliff would be and where the tetrahedral pyramid would be, and angles to other key things in this vicinity, all seem to match, including the very size of Silbury Hill in terms of its exterior moat in reference to the tholus.
Were all of these structures built by the same race of beings, human or otherwise? And if so, does this constitute new evidence that intelligent life could have once thrived on the planet Mars?
Richard Hoagland suggests many possibilities.
One is that we had a previous high-tech civilization on Earth which developed spaceflight, went to Mars, built some stuff, and then collapsed. And we're now just rediscovering our heritage. The second hypothesis is that someone else from far out there, from the stars, thousands, hundreds of light years away, came to the solar system, came to Mars, built the stuff, and built a monument to this primitive being that would someday become a human being, the human species, here on Earth.
In either case, it would seem that some global catastrophe forced the Martian population to abandon their world and move to another, to the Earth.
And someday, we may discover, in fact, that we are the Martians after all.
Assuming for a moment that there once was a flourishing race on Mars and that they built this complex structure, one important question remains. Why?
Sidonia was probably constructed to communicate some very fundamental information. We believe now that we are looking at the outlines of a whole new physics, how the universe functions, a kind of a grand unified theory, as it were, given to us, communicated, even on the photographs taken by Viking, by the geometric layout of the structures.
Researchers now believe that the key to understanding the geometry of the DNM pyramid may be in the size, shape, and position of the massive structure. Hoagland and others point out that the pyramid is not oriented to the Martian North Pole, but is turned slightly to one side. Latitude lines show that two of the faces are out of alignment at exactly the same angle, 19 19.5 degrees.
Why 19.5? That on every major and minor planet that we have flown by, looked at, or mapped in the last 30 years through NASA imagery, the major disturbance, starting with Jupiter and the Great Red Spot, lies just about at 19.5 north or south.
The Great Red Spot on the planet Jupiter is essentially a giant cyclone, an atmospheric storm larger than the entire planet Earth. It continues to churn away for year after year, right at 19.5 degrees south. Hoagland asserts that on every planet in our solar system, there does seem to be some kind of major geological or atmospheric disturbance found at 19.5 degrees north or south, including our own gigantic volcano, Mauna Loa. Colossal power rages up from the center of the Earth, emerging in the Hawaiian Islands at 19.5 degrees north. Does this suggest that the builders of the D&M pyramid recorded in its structure a sort of key to the inner nature of every planet in our system, including our own? According to Hoagland, the builders of the monuments at Cydonia had a reason for leaving the number 19.5 encrypted in a pyramid.
This is a four-sided, four-cornered object termed a tetrahedron. Because if you put this structure in a sphere, it predicts some remarkable phenomena.
Hoagland says that if a perfect tetrahedron or pyramid is placed inside a sphere such as a planet, so that one tip is at the north or south pole, the other tips will fall at the latitudes of 19.5 degrees north or south, the same as the angles discovered in the D&M pyramid. Was this giant tetrahedron built on the plains of Cydonia to help future generations understand the sources of power within their own planets?
If these discoveries truly are the long-awaited proof that there once was intelligent life on another world, would it not seem reasonable that we try to get a closer look at the Cydonia region of Mars?
And in 1992, an attempt was made to do exactly that, but with strange and surprising results. The bizarre puzzle of the Mars orbiter when UFO Diaries returns.
On September 25th, 1992, one of the most sophisticated space probes of its kind was launched into outer space. The Mars Observer was designed and programmed to approach, photograph, and carefully study the red planet in far greater detail than ever before.
Then on August 21st, 1993, at precisely 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the radio signals from the Mars Observer stopped. The Mars Observer probe, over 17 years in the making at a project cost of nearly $1 billion, had gone silent, suddenly and completely. But why? Was there a simple malfunction, or is there more to the mystery than that?
The Mars Observer mission may have been doomed before it even left the ground. Hurricane Andrew hit the coast of Florida just about the time the Mars Observer was being prepared for launch. Even though it had been prepared for such an onslaught, technicians checked the probe to make sure that it had not been damaged by the storm. The nitrogen system was equipped with special filters to prevent such dust and debris from being taken into the system, and the cameras were in a separate compartment. In spite of this, bits of paper and dust and debris was found in both compartments. It looked like someone had swept the floor and taken the dustbin and dumped it in those compartments. It's unlikely that Hurricane Andrew would have been responsible for all of that damage.
But if not the hurricane, then who? Why would anyone wish to sabotage a photographic expedition to Mars? Could this be because someone or something doesn't want us to get a closer look at our neighbor planet? And if that's true, what is the secret they're trying to protect?
There are many experts now who believe that the forces protecting a secret on Mars may not be on the red planet, but here on Earth. Since the first television cameras flew with space missions in the mid-1960s, NASA has always shared its video images with the world. But many sources report that just before the launch of the Mars Observer, NASA announced that for the first time ever, they would not allow any images sent back from Mars to be broadcast on live TV.
Why? Why would the National Space Agency suddenly change a policy that had stood for almost 40 years? Had they learned something about Mars that they wouldn't admit?
NASA has had a long, very close relationship with the Department of Defense, so they have been, I believe, under a lot of national security restrictions, and there is very much evidence, I believe, of backtracking and coyness on behalf of NASA and their involvement with UFOs.
Like all government projects, if they don't have an answer, they don't want to be embarrassed, so they keep everything secret until they know more about it.
The Mars Observer might have given us definitive answers to the question of intelligent life on Mars, and it might not have. But as of now, the Mars Observer appears to be lost somewhere in the vast reaches of space. Could it be just the latest victim of the galactic ghoul, or is there some other explanation?
Stanley McDaniel, author of the McDaniel Report, believes there is a very practical explanation.
But some people have speculated that NASA is afraid that it'll lose funding if it even so much as hints that it might imagine that there are extraterrestrial artifacts on Mars or elsewhere in the solar system. I think they believe that Congress would think this was so far-fetched that they would withdraw funds.
There are still so many questions left unanswered. Is this face just a natural formation, or was it constructed by some long-lost civilization? And what of the pyramids of Mars? Are they ancestors of the pyramids of Egypt, or just uniquely shaped piles of frozen Martian soil? Is the perfect geometric precision found in these surface features of Cydonia nothing more than a bizarre series of coincidences? Could it be that we are descendants of ancient Martians who sought refuge from their own dying world? If so, does that mean that we are the Martians we claimed we might someday meet? As scientists plan future manned missions to the Red Planet, are we on the verge of learning that Mars is not only our destination, it was also once the beginning? Is this a portrait of the being who long ago made the very first entry into the UFO diaries?